This is going to be a challenge to explain the view that they were confronted with. They were standing under a couple of trees. It was shady, but there was nothing between them and the mountain on the far side. That's what they saw first. Mervyn had said about the hotels, but the first thing they looked at was they were looking right straight across. I don't know what to call it because it's not really wide enough to be a valley, and it's not narrow enough to be a gorge, and it's not really a hollow either, or a holla, as we call it here in our talk. I'll call it a valley. I'll call it a valley for lack of another word, but I tried on that. And what they were looking straight across at looked like an alpine meadow. These people had all been to, the tourists, the wedding party, they'd all been to Switzerland many times. And they knew about the alpine meadows where the goats and the sheep and the cows will go up during the summertime and eat there and graze in the Alps. Those are actually what the Alps are. They're these alpine meadows. Well, it looked like that, except it was a little different in that there were trees periodically in there. It wasn't alpine meadows in Switzerland. They're usually mostly grass, but there were clearly deciduous trees mixed in, so it was a little bit more like a savanna. And it was so close that they could actually see goats up there grazing. And they could tell they weren't deer. They were goats. There was a flock of goats up there grazing on one of the really kind of three parts of the meadow. They could have waved to somebody over there, and the person could have waved back. I mean, they were small. They would have been real small. But anyway, they'd never seen anything really quite like it, even in their travels in Switzerland. And between them and the alpine meadow was this deep valley. I'm calling it a valley. It was steep enough that they couldn't actually see the whole way down into it because it kind of went round. And they could see that there was a road that came up below them. And it came up, and it was a way, apparently, to get into Earth's Drink. And they looked at that, and then probably, I mean, they all looked in different ways, but then they saw the hotel, one of the hotels that Mervyn had indicated. It looked Swiss as well. It wasn't huge by any means, but it was facing them, and it wasn't exactly a farmhouse, but it was a Swiss farmhouse, but it was built on that style. It didn't have any dormers. It had huge, not terribly steep, huge sloped roofs and overhangs on both sides. And what was facing them was basically a whole solid wall of windows, like an alpine farmhouse would be, facing to the south to get the heat. That was the three-star hotel. They were looking at the Lucerne, and they knew the names from their booking, but that was the Lucerne. That's where the parents were going to be staying, and it itself it wasn't up on the mountain, but it was raised up above a cliff in front of it. I mean, there was a little bit of greenery, and then there was this cliff in front of it. And they could tell, well, it was explained to them later anyway, but I think anyone that thought about it could tell that wasn't a natural cliff. That had once been a limestone quarry. That had been quarried, but it was long ago enough that it was all greened over. And coming over that low cliff was a waterfall, several small ones, so that the whole cliff was green. Well, I'm having trouble explaining this. But anyway, that's what they saw, and then Mervyn mentioned. He said, "Well, that's the Lucerne, and behind it, the hotel for Heidi and Peter, that was the three-star hotel, and it was behind it, and it was the same kind of a building. It wasn't quite as big, and it was turned, so its gable end was not facing the town of Earth's Drink, but was facing the mountain, so that would be a mountain view. And then way back, they could see it still, was still a third hotel. That was the 2-star hotel. And that one looked a good bit more like a Swiss farmhouse, but they had a little trouble seeing. And it also was turned. These weren't arranged to make some real pretty 1, 2, 3 similar hotels. And the furthest one back was once again turned about 90 degrees, and it was looking, I guess this would be west or south. It was looking up Sadler Valley. The valley up there it wasn't as dramatic as it was down there. In other words, that hotel kind of had its back to them. They could see it back there. And then, I'm having trouble with this because it was quite a sight. It was really breathtaking, the beauty of this. And then, now Earth's Drink was off on the left, but then Janney. It's time to find out a little bit about these parents. Peter's dad was named Jan, but everyone called him Janney. And I'll tell you how he would got a name like that. But everyone called him Janney. He was an engineer by love. That was his first love, really. Now, he'd made an awful lot of money, not so much as an engineer, but that's what had brought him to Akron in the first place, out of northern Pennsylvania. And he couldn't help it anymore. He says, "Look at that water wheel." He would have noticed that right away. That's the biggest water wheel I think I've ever seen, except for that one on the Isle of Man with that funny name in England. That water wheel must be at least 50 feet in diameter. Look at that thing, and there it was slowly turning, and it was more in the foreground, but it was down below. You couldn't actually see the whole of it there. But look at that, and it's not dripping any water or anything, and it's turning. Mervyn couldn't resist anymore. He was just kind of letting them soak this all in, but he said, "Yes, you're right. That is the highest and most powerful overshot water wheel in the Americas." He didn't know about Europe, and he knew that because the Wizard, Wiz is what they actually called him most of the time. Wiz, that was his nickname. Wiz would never stop talking about that. And he said, if you want to know about that water wheel, when you go, more about it in detail, when you go to the Off and On tourist guide's little building down by the train station, you ask, not Prof, Raf. Ask Raf about that, because Raf, that's kind of his domain. He loves mechanical stuff. I think you'll get along real well with Raf, and he can tell you the whole story about that water wheel. So anyway, they stood there for a while, and not saying anything. There was no wind blowing, and then they heard something. Actually, they heard something that made Heidi cry. It was a tune coming from bells. It went pum 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 pum, and then there was a dong dong 6 times dong. And why that made her cry was she and Peter looked at each other and at the same time said, "St. Paul's School." That's the carillon that they played at St. Paul's School. It's called Westminster Quarters, I think. This town has a carillon, and automatically they were counting the dong, dong, dong. It was 6 o'clock. They knew it was 6 o'clock on the dong, because that tune. See, the two of them, they hadn't met at St. Paul's School. This is in in Concord, New Hampshire. They hadn't met there for the first time. They knew each other from childhood, but they had both gone to that really exclusive private school. And at that private school, it was a quiet enough area, far away from traffic and all that stuff, that the school was dominated time-wise by that caroling that they could tell. Pum, 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 pum. That meant it was 15 after. Pum, 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 pum. That was a half hour. Dun, 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 dun. That was 45 minutes. And when they played the whole tune, that was the hour. So the memory of their time at St. Paul's School, that would have been their high school, and their time together they had then, and where they were now, it was just a little too much for Heidi. She was kind of quick to to be overwhelmed with emotion. So, well, you know, the rest of them were a little bit puzzled at that, and Peter, of course, happily gave her a hug. He had tears in his eyes too. But anyway, Mervyn said, well, let's go. It's time to take you to your hotels. Bye for now.